Thank you, Mr. Chairman and colleagues. I would love to begin and say everything I wanted to say, the Cardinal said already. But I'm going to try and give it a little bit of a different perspective with basically two parts. First of all, to speak about the actual issue of what freedom of religion means in different places of the world. I can bring a perspective of a post-communist, post-Soviet state, and then speak a little bit about the challenges that we as a Jewish community face throughout the world to the issues of religious freedom or practice, the freedom for religious practice, which is what we were supposed to speak about. Freedom of religion is understood differently in different democracies throughout the world. There are different models that work in different countries, and not always would all of these models work all over. There are countries that have a state church and still have freedom of religion, which means that there is no separation, as we understand it, of church and state, such as in Great Britain, where the Anglican Church is the official church and the head of state is also the head of the church. There are in the Commonwealth, there are other such examples of church and state relations. In the United States, we understand that there's a total separation of church and state where the state should not get involved in any religious matters whatsoever. In the post-Soviet states, they have a very, very interesting understanding of freedom of religion and separation of church and state. Separation of church and state in the Soviet times meant if the state exists, then no religion exists. And if there's religion, then it's a threat to the state. So this is the inheritance that basically is still existent in many of the post-Soviet states. And I'll give you a very, very clear example. There is a law that is still on the books from Soviet times that religious organizations are not allowed to open schools. This is a law that was passed during Soviet times, which means that if I'm a business, a company looking to make money, I'm a secular organization, any organization other than religious, I can go into the Ministry of Education, register, and open a school. If I am a religious organization, I cannot open a school, which is obviously an open discrimination against religious organizations. However, this is the law the way it was on the books for many years. And what happens is, in our society, in the post-Soviet, this is not only in Ukraine, by the way, but I'm telling you from my experience in Ukraine, but I've checked that's in other republics as well. What happens is that the religious society, because society has become more religious since the breakup of the Soviet Union, so there is a need, and there's also a request and a demand for religion to be taught in schools. So if you have religious organizations, if you have Catholic schools, Orthodox schools, Jewish schools, so then everyone can teach their religion in their schools. It's not a problem. But when you only have state schools, so they want to come into the state school and begin to teach religion in the state school, which may seem that it's not a problem, but you know, me being the American nut that believes in separation of church and state, so I meet regularly with the Council of Churches and Religious Organizations, and they're always lobbying, let's have religion taught in the public schools, state schools. And I'm always saying, let's lobby for a change in the law and let everybody open their own religious schools. So, as an example, I look at a textbook that was printed in Western Ukraine with government money, teaching Christian, they call it Christian ethics. Okay, so I figure, what's the most simple thing every Jew? I mean, the Cardinal mentioned the 10 Commandments. I mean, where can you go wrong with that? So I open the book and I say, okay, how do we teach the 10 Commandments? And they read, you know, Ukrainian pretty fluently with an American accent. And I see that it says when they're teaching about, remember the day of the Sabbath to keep it holy. And they say, well, in the ancient times, the Jews kept Sabbath on the seventh day, on Saturday. But then they wouldn't help poor people and they wouldn't help needy people. So therefore, Jesus came along and said, the laws were created for man, man wasn't created for the laws, and therefore we have to change it to Sunday, and we spend the day helping poor people and helping needy people. Now tell me if that's not planting seeds in little young minds of these Jews that will not help needy people and poor people on their Sabbath. Which of course, besides being untrue, it's also planting a certain amount of, we can say, antipathy. It's not open anti-Semitism, but it's definitely planting something of anti-Semitism within the minds of children in schools. So the idea, that's why I believe very strongly in separation of church and state, that the government should not get involved in teaching public schools, but what we all lobby for the change of this understanding of what freedom of religion means. What does separation of church and state mean? It's a very, very important aspect. Now, I mentioned the Council of Churches and Religious Organizations in Ukraine, which is a very, very successful council with representatives of all religious groups. We have 19 members. We have all the different Orthodox, the Russian, the Ukrainian Orthodox, Moscow Patriarchate, Kiev Patriarchate, Autocephalous Church. We have the Jews, the Muslims, the different Protestant groups, the different Catholic groups, everybody coming together on a regular basis to discuss the issues of legislation, freedom for religious practice, relationship, government, and religion, and how we can work together to help each other to advance, to rebuild religion in a place where not so long ago it was considered the opium of the nation. So this is something that's very, very successful. Recently, we have begun to do foreign trips. Our first trip was to Israel, all the members of the council. We did a trip to Canada and the United States. We were hosted by our president, by Ronald Lauder, who hosted the Council of Church and Religious Organizations in his house for a meeting. And this was something that was very, very important, that we got around to meet with the different religious groups in the United States and in Canada. And we're able to bring some positive news from Ukraine, which is, of course, very interesting, right? That some good things happen there as well, such as, different religious leaders getting together. I will now just spend a few minutes to speak about the actual challenges that the Jewish community faces in Europe and in the United States, by the way, which is quite interesting, about the laws on Shechita. Just to give you very, very short examples of what was going on. The law, for instance, in Poland. Poland had a law that did not allow ritual slaughter without stunning the animal, which is not good for Jews or for Muslims. The Minister of Agriculture made a special exception for what we call Shechita, to allow Shechita to take place in Poland. This was challenged at the Constitutional Court, and it was decided that the minister does not have a right to make this exception. Now, mind you, the export of kosher meat from Poland today was before this $250 million a year. Poland was shechting, had slaughterhouses that were providing kosher meat to Europe and, most importantly, to Israel. Israel was doing a lot of shechita in Poland. So with $250 million to lose, there is now, of course, draft legislation waiting to be passed in the Polish parliament to allow shechita for Jews, which will, again, for Jews and for Muslims. The issue in Europe of circumcision was very, very, made the headlines when in Germany, a court in Cologne decided that circumcision is illegal. The Conference of European Rabbis is very, very thankful and will be publicly thanking Chancellor Merkel for passing a law to protect circumcision in Germany. On May 22nd in Brussels, she'll receive the Lord Jacobowitz Award for what she has done. But there was a problem that came up more recently. This was 6 months ago, approximately. More recently, a problem arose in Germany about a certain element, a part of the ritual of circumcision. And the issue was about how to perform the circumcision. And there was, again, there's a German tradition of how it was done. The Conference of European Rabbis, along with the Organization of Rabbis of Germany and the Zentralrat, came out in support of doing it the way it's done traditionally in Germany, which is considered more hygienic and more in conformity with the medical rules. There were some that, including one of the Chabad rabbis, and that basically got support from throughout the world from different colleagues, I'll say ultra-Orthodox rabbis, because that's what I am, but from different rabbis throughout the world to support the circumcision the way it was done traditionally in some of the more religious, or I'd say in the Hasidic place, which is challenged in some places. Our position is that the government should not be regulating how Jews do circumcisions. They're doing it for 3,700 years, and thank God we were going to continue doing it. And every community should continue to do it in the way that their traditions are, and it should not be the government regulating it, but rather it should be the actual religious communities themselves that should keep their traditions the way they've done. We had a similar issue in Holland after the anti-Shechita law was struck down with the help of, again, the Conference of European Rabbis and the European Jewish Congress, who lobbied very much to the Dutch government to strike down the law trying to outlaw shechita. A covenant was signed between the government and the community regulating shechita the way it will be done. It can only be done in the presence of a veterinarian, and he has to check, which basically, at our last meeting of the Conference of European Rabbis, came out that the cost became prohibitive and the Dutch shechita would have to come to an end. At which point, the community decided that they're going to unilaterally, at this point, annul that covenant that they signed with the government and try and fight to get the government to pass a law which will allow shechita to be done. And basically what we're seeing over here, I think, is what was mentioned by my predecessor, the previous speaker, that there's sort of a feeling of delegitimization. Did I say right? Legitimize? Delegitimize. Delegitimization of Jewish tradition and Jewish law, which basically is the basis for some of these legal processes that are taking place throughout Europe. What is most surprising that in great free America, I carry an American passport so I can criticize, in great free America, there was in San Francisco a bill put forth to have a vote taken to outlaw circumcision in San Francisco. This is the United States and California, for those of us that know. And similarly, in New York City, the Jewish mayor has been trying to regulate, again, some of the traditions of how circumcision is done. And basically, this is, again, bringing us back to the previous question of government trying to regulate religious law and religious practice. And our position is that this should not be in any way regulated by government, but it should be regulated internally by the local religious communities. So thank you very, very much for listening to me.